Hi there, Terry Ryder from Hotspotting. Hope you're having a good day. It's the time of the week when we send out our weekly free newsletter, the Week in Real Estate, or the Wire for short. And it's a synopsis of the main stories impacting on residential property around Australia for the week that's just passed. If you would like to get on the mailing list for it, it's a free newsletter. You go to the hotspotting.com.au website, click on the link that says yes please, and just fill in your details, and you can receive that every week, as well as other material that we send out for free to our mailing list. The main stories this week, one of them that we highlighted was the research showing that residential land prices are rising very, very strongly around Australia, and some of the reasons why that's happening. We have this dichotomy, or apparent dichotomy, where the number of sales that are happening has actually dropped quite a lot in recent years in the major cities of Australia, but prices have grown a lot. In fact, the average or the median price for a residential allotment in capital city Australia has risen 12 or 13% in the last 12 months. So the median lot price is now about $315,000 for a standard, very small block of land on which to build a house. And in Sydney, that very small postage stamp size block of land is $480,000, even though the rate of land sale in Sydney is about a third of what it was a couple of years ago. Why is that happening? Well, generally there just isn't enough land available, and the prime reason for that is the bureaucratic delays in the system, state governments, local councils causing bureaucratic delays, loading up the system with lots of unnecessary costs, which means that there's not enough land being made available, and the prices are just getting higher and higher. There was also a story that we featured this week, which comes from SQM Research, a very good source of information for property investors to be aware of, including vacancy rates. They publish regularly, and showing that in the early part of this year, vacancies have dropped. They rose towards the end of the year. These are seasonal factors. Vacancies do tend to rise at the end of the year and then contract again at the start of the year because of the academic year, the university students moving out and then back in. And it's very different situations depending on which capital city you're talking about. Hobart has got a chronic shortage of residential property. Its vacancy rate has been less than 0.5% for quite some time. It's currently 0.4%. Canberra is also very, very low, whereas Perth is still too high, although that market's recovering and the vacancy rate I expect to improve. But Brisbane vacancies are trending upward, primarily because the inner city apartment market there has got very high vacancies. The rest of the city is a lot more comfortable. There was also some research out this week on long-term price growth, comparing the capital cities for which locations have had the best growth in house prices over 15 years, and rather surprisingly found that number one for capital growth was Hobart, and number 8 and last was Sydney, because in the case of Sydney, prior to the recent boom phase, there was 10 years in which there was virtually no growth at all. So the rankings there of the major capital cities in terms of long-term capital growth and house prices would surprise a lot of people, but it's Hobart first and Melbourne second, and Sydney last. We had a story in this week's edition of the Week in Real Estate highlighting some comments from the Reserve Bank Governor, Philip Lowe, saying that the next change in the official interest rate is some way off. It's likely to be up, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. Mr. Lowe says the Reserve Bank does not see a strong case for any adjustment of monetary policy in the near future. But of course, those of us who have mortgages know that it's all become rather irrelevant because the major lenders are moving their interest rates up, down and sideways quite independently of what the Reserve Bank is doing. There's also an article we carried in this week's edition of The Wire referring to some comments by the editor of Property Observer, Jonathan Chancellor. He was commenting on the recent turmoil in world share markets, including the Australian share market, and saying that whenever that kind of share market turmoil happens, it tends to make investors think about the solidity of property and the reality that we don't have those dramatic single day or single week collapses in values in real estate prices the way they do in the share market. We always have a quote of the week, in every edition of The Week in Real Estate, and this week's quote is from the senior economist for the Housing Industry Association, Shane Garrett, referring to that number one story about land prices and the impact that bureaucratic and political delays and decisions have on the provision of land and the cost of it, saying that the housing industry's ability to ramp up the supply of new dwellings as demand dictates is hampered by the inconsistency of the land supply pipeline. The time it takes for land to be made available to builders is unnecessarily long. And I think he's right. And I also think that within those comments and that general story about land prices and supply and demand lies the secret to the housing affordability problem. Just want to make you aware that something that's coming up on our Facebook page on Wednesday evening, the 7th of March, we're going to have a Q&A session, question and answer, where you'll have the opportunity to input your questions, and in a live session I'll be answering the questions that come from you, our listeners and watchers, and that's going to happen at 7:30 p.m. Queensland time, 8:30 p.m. in New South Wales and Victoria. Other times in the other states, you can work out the time difference, I'm sure. Wednesday the 7th of March. So just be mindful of that. It's something I'm going to do once a month, make myself available for however long it takes. It might be 30 minutes. If we get lost a question, it might be an hour or longer. But I'll just answer any questions that come in from you, our followers and customers, about real estate issues, real estate markets, anything at all that you want to throw at me. I'll do my best to answer them. Wednesday the 7th of March, the regular Q&A, the first of those sessions kicking off at that time. So that's it for now. Terry Ryder from Hotspotting. Talk to you again soon. Thanks for listening.